little something different for you guys today. In keeping in tradition with the current events of the news. Damn balloons are everywhere. Hello, and thank you for humoring me with that intro. It's something I wake up some mornings early before my alarm because I get this thought in my head. It wakes me up and then I've got to do it, whatever it is. And this morning, that's what I woke up to. I thought, you know what? We've got unidentified flying objects and we've got balloons, and apparently we're not the only country shooting them down anymore, which is interesting. Um, so the truth is out there. What the hell are these things, right? Um, I can tell you with absolute certainty, there was a hobbyist group called like the National Balloonists Association or something like that. They lost track of one of their balloons over the state of Alaska, right around the same time we shot one down. Oops. $400,000 missile shot down a $15 hobbyist balloon. Yeah. So, good evening and welcome to the War Room. Uh, it's been a couple of days, 2 weeks actually, and I'd like to start off by saying we didn't have a show last week because there just weren't very many stories. Bear in mind that when this began nearly a year ago, I did this every night because that's how many stories there were, that it gave me enough material to present it every day. And it slowed down, as wars tend to do. They start to settle in, and the news becomes less frequent. And generally, when the news comes out, uh, the horrors of war come out. Less frequently, but much worse than we were getting on a daily basis. It got to the point where I was able to sort of conglomerate the news of the week and sort of give it to you in my week in review type format. And as uh, the Russian winter and the Ukrainian winter set in, the news got even slower because everyone started digging in because nobody likes fighting in the winter. Nobody. I don't care who you are. Nobody likes it. Everyone's keeping their heads down and their butts warm. So anyway, we are on day 359, which, as coincidence would have it, makes next week's episode the 1 year anniversary of a war nobody asked for. So the cool thing is the anniversary falls on the normal broadcast day. I sort of have a special thing planned for the intro. I don't know if it'll just be a separate video because I intend for it to be a very long montage of everything that we've seen and covered on the show over the last year because I have kept every single clip and article and photograph that either was found in news outlets or from friends who actually volunteered and went there. Um, I don't know if I'm going to do that as an intro or what. If it is, I hope you can bear with it because it's supposed to be a bit longer because obviously it's a year's worth of material. It will definitely come with a copyright claim because there is a very specific audio track that I'd want to use. Actually, there's two or three. Uh, Unfortunately, two out of the three are Russian, but don't hold it against the performers because, well, one is dead and the other one was a boys' choir, so it's not their fault, but they're beautiful pieces of music which would fit the theme that I'm going for. So I guess stay tuned for that. Anyway, we are at day 359. Uh, Today's theme, it meanders a little bit, and I think we're going to have a fun little social exercise at the very end of the show because I have a what if question I'd like to ask. So, anyway, today's themes: mo money, mo problems, obviously, uh, UFOs, like the intro theme stated, and the upcoming anniversary. There's also been a very mysterious set of suicides, air quotes, in Russia. And for our social exercise, I'm going to ask the question. Now, if you're not from the United States, I understand you probably don't get what this is, but I'll try to explain it anyway. Um, anyway, should we bring back Strategic Air Command? Now, if you don't know what that is, uh, it's something that we had during the 1950s during the Cold War. So, um, after World War II had ended, we created Strategic Air Command, and well, the United States Air Force became its own branch, I think in 47 or 48. And then once the Cold War crept in, we created Strategic Air Command, which was sort of like an aerial version of Homeland Security, basically. And we were flying gigantically long uh, surveillance and deterrent flights over our own airspace. The Arctic Circle was never busier in any time in history than during that period. And the question now is the well, I'll get into that later because it's going to be a long, wound out intro anyway. So, anyway, before I do all that, let me say hello to the chat, which one of my panelists is actually here. So, Bjorn, Terry Share, and Miss Farida. So, hello to all of you and whoever else catches us on the replay or is in the chat that just hasn't said anything yet. Anyway, let's bring in my panelists. First and foremost, I have Mikhail Neitstraitsky.
We were in the middle of a gun conversation, but hello, everyone. How are you?
And we have Scott P79. And we have our future State Department guy, Jaime
Hello.
Hero. And it looks
Hello.
like Bjorn will be a
Silent participant.
audience member rather than a panelist. Give me just a second.
I got to reboot. Hold on. All right, I'm back.
Sean stepped away too.
Okay. All right. Well, let me load up the YouTube side so we can see who all's out there hanging out. Wow. I'm looking at everybody's live tonight. Wow.
Hmm.
That's good.
Sorry, technical difficulty.
Bjorn out there. We got Terry Scherer. We got Faride. We got Warsaw out there. And
Oh,
Zoro,
we do have a Warsaw now.
we have a Warsaw out there on
Out
the
there,
YouTube side.
way out there,
Way
somewhere
out there.
where the truth is, probably. Anyway,
Probably.
all right. So I did the gist of the intro. I was talking about the social exercise thing. I talked to Scott about it. I talked to Jaime about it earlier. You're just gonna have to like you have to jump on the on ramp when I get to that segment. And
Just hit me when it comes to it, all right?
yeah, and you can answer the question last, so you'll have time to look it up. Anyway,
I did throw in a couple things during the week in the War Never Changes, even though I wasn't able to be on during the week this week because shit was happening left and right this week. I didn't have a lot of time.
it was fast and it was furious. Anyway,
It wasn't fast and furious because I don't live near the border anymore.
it wouldn't matter because you can overcome anything as long as you got family. Anyway, sorry.
Not friendly and friendly.
Anyway,
I do have family, so.
well, funny that. Okay, if we're gonna get into that, I did read a story that Vin Diesel was interviewed and about Fast 10, which I think he alluded was the last movie in the franchise. Aw. But in it, he said that his ideal nemesis in the movie is basically Tony Stark. A character like Tony Stark. He wanted Robert Downey Jr. to be in this movie. And basically the premise of it is that this person is pushing electric cars. And obviously Dominic Toretto is like, no thanks. Right? The funny part is there are already clips and snippets and teaser pictures from the movie. And at the very end of one of the clips is the new Dodge Charger Daytona, the electric one.
Eek.
And it's in front of his house. So then the rumor mill started. Oh my God, did he finally convert? I threw out an idea, and it was immediately muted. Which means maybe I nailed the spoiler. But when they debuted that car at the Detroit Auto Show, the question that came up is, why do you keep shoving this crap down our throats? People don't want this. People want muscle cars, right? And the guy who designed it said, well, just to let you know, you can pull the electric drivetrain out of this. It's a modular platform, which means you could technically put an internal combustion engine back in it. I'm kind of thinking maybe that's going to be in the movie to prove that point. Because Toretto's the only guy who would want to do that for the rest of us. Anyway, all that, movie Hollywood nonsense aside, let's go ahead and get into the show.
Okay.
Sound good?
A lot of stuff going on this week. You notice that?
A bit. Most of the stories I have are a little bit short, actually. There's a couple that have got some length to it, but I think we'll be able to get through this pretty quickly. In the intro, I mentioned that we were going to go from day 352 to day 359, 359 being today. However, my first story didn't actually, it didn't come until Sunday, which would be day 354, February 12th. So let's go ahead and start with that because this took me by surprise. It was always my understanding that the United States' contribution to the Ukrainian war was somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 60 billion dollars. I was way off. Way off. So here's your chart. The United States continues to lead the world in contributions to Ukraine with nearly 200 billion in promised or sent aid as the US ally continues to fight against Russia. Yeah. According to the Ukrainian government, the U.S. leads all countries with 196 billion in total military, financial, and humanitarian aid to Ukraine between January 24th, 2022 through November 20th, 2022.
Now, Americans, keep note of that. That's where your tax dollars and all our surplus equipment are going.
Sort of. The thing is $200 billion is a drop in the bucket when you're looking at $4 trillion omnibus spending bills. That's like nothing in comparison. But here's the big surprise. Germany has sent the second most, with 172 billion sent in the same time frame. So think about this. The United States has always been accused of sticking our nose in all of global business, right? And I would argue that that is how we get our influence as a world superpower, is we keep interjecting ourselves as police of the world. It's not a bad thing as long as people are asking for your help. Well, if you look in the last 20-ish years, Germany's doing the same thing with a checkbook. Who bailed out the Greeks? Germany. Who backed... Huh?
The EU.
EU back.
Right. And who practically runs the EU bank? Germany. Who bailed out the Spaniards? Who bailed out just about everybody with austerity programs? Germany, because they pretty much run the EU, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of, in a way, it's kind of refreshing. Somebody else is shouldering the burden, so we don't have to anymore. And that's a good thing, because we're always saying, hey, we can't keep footing the bill for all you people. You've got to pull your own weight. Well, I was shocked when I read the statistic that Germany put this much up. I'm like, where did they come up with the money? I mean, they keep bankrupting their own, country by bailing out everyone else. And what's really amazing is Germans aren't upset about this.
I know how they keep how they got the money.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm gonna make a really bad joke here. So
don't tell me they've been withdrawing from the Vatican vault from their 1940s deposits.
No, that would be the Vatican. That would be Swiss. The Swiss deposits.
The Swiss vaults.
This is the Swiss vaults. But no, that's not the joke. They stopped funding Uwe Boll's movies.
Oh, God. All right. Fair enough. All right. In that same time span, the rest of the world has contributed less than 75 billion in total aid, with most of that sum coming from the United Kingdom, 28.2 billion, Poland, 24.3 billion, and strangely enough, Estonia, 5.48 billion. These figures do not include loans sent to Ukraine or additional contributions that were approved by their respective governments between December of 22 to today. Because in that time span, to be fair, Norway is committing a lot in the future because they are actually one of the biggest oil producers up in that part of the world. And they said, if we can help, we will help, which is good, especially since I think they're trying to join NATO too, right? Anyway, Ukrainian President Zelensky has visited each of the top contributing countries except Estonia. The growing figures come as the Ukraine-Russia war nears its one-year mark. Russia first invaded on February 24th, 2022. Some members of Congress are looking to put a stop to the superabundant spending by the U.S. government, including Representative Matt Gaetz, who introduced a resolution to end military and financial aid to Ukraine. How much more for Ukraine? Is there any limit? Asked Gaetz on the House floor. Which billionth dollar really kicks in the door? Which red line will we set and would not later cross? The proposal also urges Ukraine and Russia to seek a peace deal, requiring them to renew their negotiations. The Ukraine Fatigue Resolution has at least 10 co-sponsors and calls for the U.S. to, quote, end its military aid and financial aid to Ukraine and urges all combatants to reach a peace agreement, end quote.
Who did that?
We did.
Me.
I'll give you the names here in a second. There's a list.
There's always a list.
The resolution notes that the U.S. has been the top contributor to the Ukrainian war effort, providing financial, military, and humanitarian aid to the U.S. ally. In January, President Biden approved additional security assistance, including 31 Abrams M1 tanks to Ukraine. On top of that, reports suggest another $2 billion could be in the pipeline. This is about freedom. Freedom for Ukraine and freedom everywhere, Biden said last month. Gates' resolution claims that the U.S. is inadvertently contributing to civilian casualties by providing weapons and potentially prolonging what he called an everlasting conflict. America is in a state of managed decline, and it will exacerbate if we continue to hemorrhage taxpayer dollars towards a foreign war, said Gates. He is also a member of the House Armed Services Committee. We must suspend all foreign aid for the war in Ukraine and demand that all combatants in this conflict reach a peace agreement immediately. Co-sponsors to this resolution include Andy Biggs, Arizona, Lauren Boebert, Colorado, Paul Gossi, Arizona, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Georgia, Anna Paulina Luna, Florida, Thomas Massey, Kentucky, Mary Miller, Illinois, Barry Moore, Alabama, Ralph Norman, South Carolina, and Matt Rosendale, Montana, all Republicans. Now, this is the one time I'm going to tell Matt Gaetz to shut his fucking mouth. Because no matter how he tries to spin this, he's going to look like an asshole. The fact of the matter is this. There is a world war, whether you want to admit it or not. And we talked about this off air all week. There is a conflict where a nation has invaded another country illegally. There is a genocide happening. There is proof of this genocide in 2 cities, one in the east, one in the west. We have seen the mass graves. We have seen the bodies being pulled up. It's not a secret. Because of this, countries from all over the world have opined their opposition to what's going on. They have chosen sides. They have decided that they were going to assist financially and militarily with hardware as an effort to support the defense of a country that is illegally invaded. What does this sound like to you? Nations have chosen sides. Nations are backing those sides. Once upon a time, the Germans decided to take an extended holiday in Poland, and the same thing happened. Nations chose sides. They became known as the Axis and the Allies.
Was that before or after their beach time in France?
Before 1939.
Okay.
But it's the same thing. It's the same dance. It's just played by a different band. This is what a world war looks like. Not calling it what it is doesn't deny the fact that it exists. The only difference is nobody wants to commit troops to expediently reach its conclusion. That's the difference. But you know what? That's how it started in the other 2 world wars. People sent aid, humanitarian assistance, munitions, defensive tools first. That's what happened first. Then when we realized that ain't enough, then nations started committing troops. Then we got attacked by the Japanese. Then the Germans mistakenly declared war on the United States, even though the only thing we declared war on was Japan. Their mistake. That's a them problem, not an us problem. We solved that problem. I don't agree with Matt Gaetz. I don't agree that you should demand that the Ukrainians seek a peace agreement when they're the ones who have been wronged since day one. These are the people who are being invaded. These are the people who have been fighting for their very existence, the defense of their existence. And you have the audacity to tell them, go to the peace table? How about you lead the group who has to go talk to the Russians at the peace table, Mr. Gates? Why don't you go put that buck-tooth face of yours in front of Putin and say, fucking stop or else? And then have him look you right in the eye and go, or else what? What are you going to do? Because that's the problem. He's not in the mood to negotiate. He doesn't think he's doing wrong. You can't demand the defender to come to the peace table. That's ridiculous. Is it expensive? Yes. War is expensive. You know what else war does? It creates a wartime economy if you play it right. And the United States have been the lords of war for 2 world wars. We know how to play this game. We're just not playing it because we forgot how. Because this country forgot how to fight wars to victory. I don't agree with him. Do any of you agree with him? Should we just stop writing checks and be like, go to the peace table? Do you think he's right?
No, I agree with you that we stop knowing how to fight war, how to end wars, more or less. You know, because in World War II, we pretty much ended it. But you know, instead of doing what MacArthur said in Korea, we decided to do the opposite, and look where that got us.
Diplomacy?
No, MacArthur said we need to nuke the border of China and North Korea
To set an example.
and it set an example. And instead, they removed him and said he was what you call it? What he was? Was it?
Mad.
Not mad, but he had dementia or something.
He was delusional.
Yeah.
He
But
was,
the problem is,
he was inviting the
right.
world to nuclear holocaust.
He was right, though. Unfortunately.
To a degree, yes, he was right. The thing is,
We should have never been in Vietnam because that was the French's fault.
no, it's the Chinese fault.
No, it was the French's fault because
The
they
Chinese
were involved.
helped Vietnam push the French colonials out. Then the power vacuum began.
Yeah.
Anyway, where was I going with that?
So, anyways, sorry.
No, it's okay. There. It's a fair point. It's well made.
So.
Where was I going with that? I don't know. You can't tell the defender to come to the negotiating table. I think that's unreasonable. That's incredibly unreasonable. And the other thing is oh yeah, okay, I remember now. I talked to Rick this morning about this.
Oh boy.
I think he sort of saw it my way. This entire conflict could have ended before it even started. This could have ended, like, imagine this, right? You have watched the Russian military assemble for almost a year around the outskirts of Ukraine in multiple places. Right. You can see that the Black Sea Fleet is warming up the engines, so to speak, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're gearing up. S-400 batteries are being moved into position to defend Crimea, right? Those are very, very good surface-to-air missiles. Very good. So there's a 40-mile-long convoy. And you know what they're there for. Stuck in country after they had moved across the border, right? Could you imagine what would have happened if one flight, say 15 A-10s, just turned the entire convoy into the highway of death, 2022 version, right?
Mm.
And at the same time, the entire Black Sea Fleet is sitting at the bottom of the Black Sea by the silent service. I think that the war would have ended right there. Because what you would have done is you would have forced Putin to decide how far he wants to take this after you have just bloodied his nose. You've just taken away his land campaign and his sea campaign in a single attack. And he's got none of it left, and it's in tatters. The only thing he had left to fall back on was ballistic missiles. Do you think he would have used them after doing that to him, saying basically that action would have been like NATO going, fucking stop. This is your last warning. Right? But they didn't do that, did they? Because NATO has never won a war, have they?
No,
They've never fought a war.
Exactly.
we've never fought
Which
a
is
war.
which is why I am shocked by the thought that they could even dictate this one. Like, they have no experience. So why did we let them do this? Why did we let them drag this out to the point where thousands, hundreds of thousands of people have died, millions of people have been displaced? Why did we let NATO allow that or to make that happen? Oh, because diplomacy rules the day.
No, because Joe Biden has abdicated the United States' responsibility for leading the world.
Yes. I sort of get why, though. Like, okay, imagine if Biden is saying, hey, don't look at me. The guy that was here before me kept trying to tell NATO to contribute their part, do their part. I just want them to do their part too. I was taking a back seat so they can take charge because this is a global effort, right? If he were to say that, I would have a very hard time arguing with him. Because guess what? The guy before him used to say that. Pay your fair share, contribute your fair thing. We need to stop being 90% in and the rest of the world is only 10% in. So if Biden had the brain matter to say that argument that way, I couldn't disagree with him. I'd be like, you know what? It's kind of right. But in this case, what good did it do stalling? It didn't. People died. Country's been destroyed, mostly. We know who the bad guy is, clearly. And yet, nobody's done a damn thing to stop him, have they? Why? No, because diplomacy rules the day. We're just going to send the aid to the Ukrainians and let them defend themselves as long as possible. Why? Because, technically, it's a little bit like Vietnam, isn't it? This is a military hardware beta test, and everyone who's involved is trying out their shit.
Yeah, this would
Somewhere
be
else.
more like Afghanistan,
Well, it's just another example.
not
Though.
Vietnam.
Well, it's just a later example of that. These conflicts are where people send all their hardware and they test them out. The only difference is we're not sending our troops this time. We're sending every resource but the human resource. But it's still the same thing. Oh, here, try our
No,
new
we're
Sling
bringing
Blade
them
drone
here.
to train them. But it's like,
Yeah.
here, try our new Sling Blade drone for us and see how that works. Here, let's try this new AIM 120 missile. Or, hey, let's try this new radar system. Or just whatever it is, you know? That's what they're still doing. The world is doing that. Anyway, I spent too much time on this one story. I just wanted you all to see the money and be shocked by it because it was way more than I thought. Moving on.
Indeed.
Monday, day 355, February 13th. And you probably saw this story like the rest of us. The U.S. State Department on Monday ordered all U.S. citizens in Russia to leave immediately as the war in Ukraine ramps up and concerns over arbitrary detentions mount. U.S. citizens residing or traveling in Russia should depart immediately. This came from the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. Exercise increased caution due to the risk of wrongful detentions. Basically, that says do not travel to Russia. Do not become the next... I forgot her name. Brittany Griner. Don't become the next Brittany Griner. Don't be detained over some bullshit. That's what they're basically saying. The embassy warned that its ability to help U.S. citizens in Russia was severely limited due to staffing limitations, travel restrictions, and the suspension of consular services, or otherwise known as, we can't help you because we bailed out too. All Americans have been warned to find a way out of the country immediately and were reminded that the U.S. debit or credit cards do not work in Russia, and the electronic transfers of funds have become increasingly difficult due to sanctions. Which means whatever you got in your pocket's all you got to get out of there with. That's a bit scary. Russian security services have arrested U.S. citizens on spurious charges, singled out U.S. citizens in Russia for detention and harassment, denied them fair and transparent treatment, and convicted them in secret trials without ever presenting credible evidence, the NBC has added. State Department could not be reached for comment on why this warning was issued now and whether that suggested a looming escalation in the war in Ukraine. The Kremlin on Monday dismissed the warnings by the embassy and pointed to similar calls to leave Russia issued by the State Department in September, shortly after Russian President Putin mobilized more Russians to join his ranks in Ukraine. Warnings have been voiced by the State Department many times in the last period, so this is not a new thing, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov says, according to Reuters. U.S. experts on Monday were divided on the significance of the warning and its timing, with one former Defense Intelligence Agency intel officer, this is Rebecca Koffler, I don't know why they just have this massively long title for her, describing the alert as serious. Koffler points out that the announcement came 10 days ahead of Russia's Soviet Army Day, also known as Defender of the Fatherland Day, and 11 days before the one-year anniversary of the invasion in Ukraine. Putin wants to claim to some achievement, she says, warning that she believes that Russia will launch a massive assault within the next week as it looks to gain some ground in Ukraine. Ukrainian and Western defense officials have been sounding the alarm for months that Russia is planning a major offensive in an attempt to turn the tide after gaining very little ground in the last few months. There's no way for this war to go except up. Koffler continued, questioning why the department had not issued another warning to U.S. citizens ahead of the looming offensive. Neither side currently has an exit strategy, she says, pointing out that both Ukraine and Russia view the war as an existential threat and therefore will not concede anything on the battlefront. Former CIA Moscow station chief Dan Hoffman argued that the embassy alert was routine and served as a reminder to Americans of the dangerous situation that they're in if they remain in or travel to Russia. The bottom line is that we've issued these warnings in the past. Just because you issued it once doesn't mean everybody remembers. We don't make decisions based on calendar dates, he continues. I've served in a lot of embassies overseas. What we do, though, is we look at the threat and we say, it's still out there. We'll remind everybody. Public service announcement. There's a big war going on, and U.S. persons are always at risk, he says. We've got to serve our citizens and let them know that this is quite a dangerous place still. We probably don't want more people to get caught up in Russia's extortion. He added, referring to American Whalen and basketball player Brittany Griner, along with the respective concessions Washington made in swapping an international arms dealer for a WNBA athlete. We don't want to have to make those embarrassing trades again. So instead of doing that, we're saying GTFO, because if you get caught, you're on your own. We warned you. That's how government works. Moving on, because I know nobody wants to talk about Brittany Griner or my weird obsession with her back in the day.
Didn't know you were in the trainees.
Yeah.
Tuesday, February 14th, day 356, Valentine's Day. I had a pretty good one. Did you?
It's all right.
Ukrainian forces claim that they're killing nearly 1,000 Russian troops every day, and that they eliminated 5,000 ground troops in a single battle in late January, according to the UK official citing data from Ukraine's defense ministry.
That doesn't sound right.
What I can confirm is the number killed between yesterday to today was over 800. So they're playing the law of averages relatively well. Russian troops, including the elite 155th Naval Infantry, stormed the Ukrainian coal mining city of Vuhledar near Donetsk in late January. Ukrainian forces repelled the offensive, however, and killed, injured, or captured 5,000 plus troops. Meanwhile, UK officials say that the war is exalting a heavy toll on Russia, with 824 troops dying each day according to Ukrainian updates. The 155th Brigade already had to be restaffed 3 times. The first time after Irpin and Bucha. The second time they were defeated near Donetsk. They've recovered again. Oh my god, I've never seen this name before. Alexei Dmytrashkivsky. That is a tough name. Dmytrashkivsky, a Ukrainian Defense Forces spokesman, told Politico, and now almost the entire brigade has already been destroyed near Vulera. The spike in Russian casualties comes as Russian President Vladimir Putin has conscripted hundreds of thousands of fresh troops into his military. The poorly trained recruits are now making their way to the battlefields of Ukraine. News of Russia's losses comes a day after the U.S. Department of State ordered all U.S. citizens in Russia to leave immediately on Monday, warning of false arrests. U.S. citizens residing or traveling in Russia should depart immediately. This came from the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. Exercise increased caution due to the risk of wrongful detentions. In a stark message, the department also said, do not go to Russia. This is overlap, obviously, from 2 different stories. On the same day, unless you guys want to add anything to this.
Nope.
Okay.
Don't go to Russia.
Yeah, don't go to Russia, exactly. On the same day, I'll show you this picture. I did not flip that upside down. That's how it landed. American defense officials on Tuesday sought to dispel any doubt that Iran is supplying drones for Russia's war in Ukraine, releasing more photos and analysis of unmanned aircraft deployed in the conflict to demonstrate Tehran's involvement. During a briefing in London, analysts from the Defense Intelligence Agency displayed photos of drones that attacked Ukraine alongside images of those previously traced to Iran. Or Iran, sorry. Comparison of design details such as tail fins, nose cones, and landing gear show that the weapons used in Ukraine are indistinguishable from the Shahed 131 and 136 attack drones and the Mohajer 6 unmanned aerial vehicles used in the Middle East. They're basically exact copies. The effort to show the homework is intended to help persuade governments or international agencies of Tehran's involvement. Iran has said that it supplied a small number of drones to Russia before the invasion of Ukraine, but has denied providing any more since troops crossed the border last February. Bullshit. The evidence proves otherwise, an official from the Defense Intelligence Agency said while speaking on the condition of anonymity because of the sensitivity of the information. Iran is a perfect partner in the conflict with Russia, the official said. U.S. officials also suggested that Iran was gleaning valuable information by deploying its technology in Ukraine, including how the drones perform in different weather conditions, seeing how they can be used under different scenarios, and getting a real-life feedback that allows them to make the weapons even more effective. Beta testing. Didn't that sound familiar? For example, after learning that civilians were able to flee because they could hear the drones approaching, weapons designers are likely to make future models quieter. Duh. They're getting to see it used on a mass level, the official says. It's a process for them. Iran is able to see this feedback and make adjustments. Bearded guy, that's the Shahed 136 drone, which is what the Russians are using, which was given to them by Iran. Iran, Persia, Iran, however you want to pronounce it. They're getting close to seeing it used, or sorry, we just said that. The war in Ukraine also allows Iran to demonstrate the capabilities of its technology to other potential buyers. Iran sees this as a great marketing opportunity, the official added. The analysis was released a day after Britain presented evidence that Iran is supplying advanced weapons to the Houthi rebels in Yemen. Britain presented drones and missiles seized from vessels in the Gulf of Oman to the United Nations as evidence that Iran is violating, I'm doing that on purpose, I'm just giving you all the pronunciations, is violating Security Council resolutions barring weapons shipments to the Houthis.
Iran.
It's Iran, Iran, Persia, however you want to say it.
Yeah, it's Iran.
I know. The timing of these...
Oh, I had to ask one of my Iran buddies.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I work with one, so... The timing of the release suggests
No, I
Western
just wanted to
powers
make
are
sure the
hardening
spelling
their
if I was
stance.
wrong.
It's okay. Anyway, the timing of the release suggests Western powers are hardening their stance on Iran, said Tobias Bork, a research fellow for the Middle East Security Studies at the Royal United Services Institute. For the last 20 years, Iran's policy has been focused on limiting their nuclear program. But efforts to resuscitate talks on a nuclear deal are stalled, and officials in Washington, London, and Brussels have begun to shift their messaging. The idea that an agreement could be a confidence-building measure paving the way to resolving other issues in the region is fastly vanishing. We're headed in a direction where the rest writ large, the U.S. and Europe will identify Iran as a bad actor, Bork says, and the focus has to be on deterring and containing. So that's where the policy is headed. Here's the problem. You can make deals with them, but you're making deals with a nation that is led by a religious leader who hates you. So every deal he makes with his puppet prime minister has him in the background with his fingers crossed behind his back, because no matter what they say they're going to do, they never do it. Oh, yeah, you can come and inspect our place. Here, we'll tell you when. And before that date, they're moving everything out of that place. Or they're just doing their shenanigans in other places. No, you can't go to that one. That one's not even online. You can go to this one. See how clean and shiny it is? Look, we're doing everything the way you told us to. You got that guy over there turning a wrench on a nut that's way smaller than the wrench he's using it. Just like that stupid commercial with the Russian guy that looked like he was working. He was just turning a wrench over a stud. Didn't even touch the nut. That's what they're doing. They're making a mockery of the inspections. Thank you. Moving on. We're getting up there. So we talked about UFOs, and we talked about them being shot down. What you probably didn't know, and I know this isn't the best picture, I just picked a Romanian jet. Romania briefly scrambled its military jets, and neighboring Moldova temporarily closed its airspace on Tuesday after authorities in both countries reported mysterious weather balloon-like objects traversing their skies. The incidents occurred around midday local time and briefly raised concerns in the two European countries, which both border Ukraine and have been affected by Russia's war. Romania's defense ministry said that it deployed two jets that are under NATO command to its southeastern skies to seek an aerial object it described as being small with characteristics similar to a weather balloon. It had been detected initially by radar systems in Romanian airspace at an altitude of about 36,000 feet. The crews of the two aircraft did not confirm the presence of an aerial target, neither visually nor on onboard radars. Ministry statement says, adding that the two MiG-21 Lancer aircraft stayed in the vicinity for about 30 minutes before returning to base. It was unclear whether the two incidents were related, and neither country said where they believed the object even came from. The events follow a string of comparable incidents this month in the U.S., in which objects detected and shot down by warplanes included a high-altitude Chinese balloon that traversed the majority of American mainland airspace. China says it was a weather balloon that had accidentally drifted off course. The incident in Moldova triggered widespread travel disruption and brief panic when authorities temporarily closed the country's airspace over what they later described as an object similar to a weather balloon, spotted near the north border with Ukraine. Scores of flights in the country of about 2.6 million people, one of Europe's poorest, were canceled or rescheduled. Some were diverted to Romania. Given the weather conditions and the impossibility of monitoring and identifying the object as well as its flight path, the decision was taken to temporarily just close the airspace, Moldova's aviation authority said in a statement. Romania has been a NATO member since 2004 and a European Union member since 2007. Moldova is militarily neutral and thus not a potential NATO member. It's looking to forge closer ties with the West and was granted EU candidate status last June, the same day as Ukraine. On Monday, Moldovan President Maya Sandu accused Russia of plotting to overthrow her country's government and derail it from its EU accession path. Sorry. Russia's foreign ministry spokesman Maria Zakharova dismissed Sandu's claims on Tuesday as absolutely unfounded and unsubstantiated. Well, of course you would say that. You're a Russian. That's what you do. Moving on. But there are UFOs in Europe now. Ooh. This one should, if you're a 2A person, like most of us here, if you're a gun guy, if you like international pew pew, this story is going to warm the cockles of your heart. In a way. In another way, it's going to make you go, what the fuck? Why can't we have these toys? Trust me, you'll see in a minute. I call this story Freebies from Iran. Look at that. Isn't it beautiful? I have one similar to that on my wall. Iran may have inadvertently donated thousands of assault rifles and thousands of tons of ammunition to the Ukrainian war effort after the U.S. Navy, go Navy, confiscated the weapons from suspected smuggling ships in the Middle East. Sidebar. Do you remember we talked about this a couple of weeks ago and I said, wouldn't it be cool if we just took the weapons and gave them to the Ukrainians? Well, guess what?
Exactly what we did.
The U.S. military is considering sending the weapons along to Ukraine after confiscating them in the Gulf of Oman, which includes 5,000 assault rifles, 1.6 million rounds of ammunition, and a handful of anti-tank missiles. Over 7,000 proximity fuses as well, according to the Wall Street Journal. The potential new source of military aid comes as Ukraine's Western allies sound the alarm over ammunition expenditure. The war in Ukraine is consuming an enormous amount of munitions and depleting Allied stockpiles, NATO Secretary and Swedish underwear model Jens Stoltenberg said Monday. The current rate of Ukraine's ammunition expenditure is many times higher than our current rate of production. Well, that's because most of you nations are anti-gun and you don't produce any ammo because you don't promote shooting sports, you idiots. This puts our defense industries under heavy strain. The U.S. and allied navies have seized the weapons in a series of operations in the Gulf of Oman, disrupting Iranian efforts to smuggle weapons to Houthi rebels in Yemen. The U.S. Navy seized an additional 2,000 assault rifles when boarding a suspected smuggling vessel back in early January. French Special Forces seized an additional 3,000 assault rifles in a joint operation in late January. The U.S. Navy routinely patrols common smuggling routes in the Gulf of Oman. Iranian vessels smuggling weapons to Yemen must travel east through the Gulf before heading south to Yemen. International law and the UN Security Council ban the direct or indirect supply, sale, or transfer of weapons to Houthi rebels in Yemen. Sidebar. Bearded Guy says that after this is all over, hopefully there will be loads of military surplus ammunition for us.
I'm waiting for AK-12 parts kits.
Wouldn't it be nice if there would just be loads of military surplus AKs brought to the United States under import with no NFA? Wouldn't that be better? Just the thought. I can dream. Still want a DPM. Still want my fucking MRAP from Afghanistan. Ukraine has requested more and more aid as Russia renews its ground offensive. Russia's invasion of Ukraine will hit the one-year mark next week. The U.S. has delivered tens of billions of dollars worth of military equipment and other aid throughout the 12 months of fighting. President Biden's administration has vowed to continue sending aid to Ukraine for, quote, as long as it takes. Okay, I'm looking at the numbers, and so far, It was 10,000 assault rifles, 1.6 million rounds of ammunition, anti-tank missiles, and 7,000 proximity fuses. That's a pretty good month of seizures, if you ask me. If I was Ukraine, I'd be sending Christmas cards to Iran. Thanks for the stuff, bruh. Just saying. I too started off as an AR guy, bearded guy, but then I have joined the Church of Kalashnikov. If anyone has seen my wall, I own an RPK. I love it. It's
So do I.
big, it's heavy, it's vulgar, it's beautiful, and it was made the same year I was born. I'm genetically obligated to love it. And I do. And it's a great way to gain muscle mass because that fucker is heavy. Sometimes I catch myself walking around my house with it in one arm like Rambo and just seeing how long I can hold it up before my arm falls off. I think the record's 7 minutes. It's heavy, very heavy, especially with a 75-pound drum on it too. She's a big girl. She's got big hips. Moving on. Okay, we're going to talk about farming a little bit. Crops. And
Did
Kamaz
someone
trucks.
say farming?
Yeah, and Kamaz trucks too.
Ooh.
Ukraine's small-scale farmers, who are playing a critical role in feeding the population during the war, will be eligible for funding through the UN's International Fund for Agricultural Development following Ukraine's induction Wednesday into the body, officials said. Small farmers in Ukraine play a fundamental role in feeding the country during the war, producing up to 80% of the dairy, fruits, and vegetables consumed by the population. Farmers in the western provinces, where many people have fled to escape fighting in the east, will require support to meet the increased demand for food, the organization says. The farms are also an important source of income for an estimated 13 million Ukrainians living in rural areas, as poverty and malnutrition are becoming more widespread. According to a recent report by the UN Food and Agricultural Organization, many people living in rural areas are on the brink of poverty, with 44% living below subsistence levels and 7% actually suffering from malnutrition. Well, barley and turnip eating people. Remember all that jokes? It wasn't really a joke, was it? They're really malnourished. Membership in IFAD, which is the International Fund for Agricultural Development, will give farmers access to both grants and loans, as well as supplementary funds, officials said. IFAD has provided more than $24 billion to fund projects in developing countries since 1978. Ukraine's membership in IFAD, in discussion since 2016, also recognizes Ukraine's role as a major global producer and exporter of wheat, corn, and sunflower oil as the ripple effects of the war shake the global supply chain. Despite the war, Ukraine is still committed to contributing to global food security to defuse the food crisis and save millions of people from hunger, Yaroslav Melnik, Ukraine's ambassador to Italy, said after membership was conferred. However, this requires international assistance and investment in particular, support to increase exports, and to perform the sowing and harvesting campaigns, he says. Basically, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the gist of what I'm reading here is essentially that Ukraine is now being allowed to tap into subsidiary funding for farming, much like how the United States government subsidizes the American farm industry.
Exactly.
There's a reason why your vegetables are as cheap as they are. It's not because the farmers can afford them to sell you that cheap. It's because the government subsidizes their financial losses so they don't have to increase the prices to make up for their losses.
This is similar to the thing what they do in the U.S. for cattle.
Yes, cattle,
Which
farming, all of it.
Well, we kind of talked about.
You and I did, yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically this is a global version of that. And now Ukraine has qualified for it, and they will begin to reap the benefits of the assistance of that. Because not only are they feeding their own people, but they're feeding the world.
Yeah.
And that's the thing you and I talked about pretty pretty extensively today about, well, what does Ukraine provide the world? Well, over 30% of the world's grain
Well, yeah, and oil that
and
we
oil.
cook with. Majority of what we cook with.
Yeah. Let's see. Bearded
So
Guy says, I wonder if Ukraine will start producing ammunition and guns after this is all said and done. Hopefully they win. I say hopefully because we all know that can change fast.
I think
Do
they would,
do they
based
have their
on
own
right.
munitions factories?
Well, I
Yes.
mean, yeah, they do. I think they would. The only thing is that do we know if the majority of their ammunition factories were destroyed?
Do we know
Because they
if
were
it's for
like there was the
domestic use
first things that were
only?
targeted.
Right, but do we also know if it's domestic use only, non-export use?
Well, the thing is, from my understanding, at one point before this conflict, I believe they were in the talks of
Hmm.
sending shipments to like ammo to
Hmm.
other com block state that are once com block countries. So I mean,
In
could they
defense of
theoretically?
possible future Russian aggression?
Huh?
Well, I know for a fact Ukraine has a huge storage facility in the west somewhere,
Yeah, they
northwest
Odessa?
do.
of the capital.
Oh,
No, northwest of the capital, and
so up near the Polish border.
yeah, it's a huge cave complex,
Hmm.
like huge.
That's a
Like
risky place. I mean, it may be
the
near the
Russians
Polish
can't
border,
touch it.
but that means it's right up near Belarus too.
Well, I
I've
know
got
it's. I'm not sure if it's northwest or like more north,
more west.
west.
Okay, because I
But
mean, the reason I brought that up was because I have a story about
it's
Lukashenko coming up.
it's like the Russians can't touch it.
Hmm. They can't
They'd have
get
to
to it
nuke
in a
the place.
direct route, is what you're saying.
They could
Um,
blow up the entrance, and they could just dig out the entrance.
that sounds like the end of the monuments, man. Take out the entrance
Kind
and
of is.
have to dig it out later. Okay, let's go into the IKEA thing, or the Swedish, I call it the Swedish boom. You may recognize what that is. I forgot the name of it offhand. Oh, and I remember now. It's called the Archer. Sweden pledged Wednesday to rush the fearsome Archer artillery cannons to Ukraine as soon as possible, but also cautioned that future military aid would have to be balanced with its own defense needs as a would be future member of the NATO military alliance. So basically, they're saying, look, we're going to send you stuff to help you defend yourself, but we're going to have to hold some of it for ourselves because, well, we share close to an 800-mile border with Russia, or at least Finland does, right? Yeah. So they're kind of cautiously doling out their resources. Speaking on a visit to the Ukrainian capital, Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson said Archer howitzers, as well as 51 infantry fighting vehicles and anti tank weapons that Sweden has promised, will together make a significant contribution to Ukraine's combat power. The latest promised package of Swedish military aid comes as Ukraine is fiercely clinging to territory in the east of the country against renewed Russian assaults. Ukraine is counting on continued Western military aid to repel Russian advances and to launch its own offensives. The truck mounted Archer is also called the shoot and scoot weapon, able to quickly fire a succession of 3 rounds and be on the move again before the first shell even hits the target. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said this week that Ukraine's Western suppliers are, quote, in a race of logistics to stop Russia from seizing the battlefield initiative. Archer cannons will join other Western supplied equipment that help tilt artillery engagements in Ukraine's favor, along with French made Caesar howitzers, U.S. supplied HIMARS, and other precision strike systems. Kristersson, speaking at a news conference in Kyiv with Ukrainian President Zelensky, wouldn't say exactly when his country's Archer cannons would arrive, citing security needs and practical reasons as well, in terms of training and things like that. But he said training would start very soon and pledged Archer deliveries as soon as possible. Zelensky described the Archer as one of the best artillery pieces in the world and predicted that it would impact Russia's invasion forces on the battlefield. The stronger Ukraine is now, the sooner the Russian aggression ends, he says. Christensen was less emphatic about another weapons system on Kyiv's wish list, fighter planes. He didn't rule out such support, but he suggested that Sweden wouldn't want to go it alone as a potential supplier, and that other nations would have to rally around the idea of plane deliveries, as they eventually did around sending NATO standard tanks to Ukraine. We don't exclude anything right now. This is not the time of excluding anything, the Swedish Prime Minister says. But at the same time, we also acknowledge the fact that we need an international coalition to do further steps. That's quite obvious. That right there is political speak of, well, if we're going to do this war thing, we're going to do it all together. So if we're guilty, we're all guilty together. That's what that is. Safety in numbers. Christensen said that Sweden's drive to join NATO, along with fellow candidate nation Finland, will also play into its thinking about military supplies to Ukraine. Basically, it's, hey bro, we'll hook you up, but you got to let us in. I think that's fair. Being a candidate for NATO membership puts us in a very special situation right now. We have very obvious reasons to be very careful with our own defense right now, he says. We will do everything we can to support Ukraine, and we will do it in every way possible that doesn't adventure or risk the Swedish ability to defend itself, because that is a core competence for a NATO applicant country to uphold. That's true. We want to join, but we have to be able to defend ourselves if we're under attack. So we can't give away all our goodies, because then we'd be vulnerable. What he didn't tell you is they have something called the Stridsvagn 122, which is one of their latest and most brilliant main battle tanks. It's basically, the Swedes did with the Leopard 2A5 what the Israelis did with the M60 Patton main battle tank. They improved it indigenously and made it their own, the Stridsvagn 122. Its outward appearance suggests that it's a Leopard 2A5, but it's more heavily armored than the Leopard 2A6X, which is one of the most durable tanks that in the German are in inventory. It's the 2A6X is the heaviest armored Leopard on paper. The 2A7s are lighter, faster, nimbler. But the brawler is the 2A6X. This thing exceeds that. This is Sweden's own design. And then they thought, what else can we do to it? Hey, let's put those really cool French smoke canister grenade launchers on the turret. Let's just put, I don't know, 8 on each side. So it's like, they've got some pretty neat toys. They got the Archer, they've got the 122, because it also has a 122 millimeter L55 smoothbore main gun. It's badass. That thing is big and it is badass. Anyway, look forward to that in a Ukrainian battlefront near you. Maybe. Possibly. I don't know. Moving on. We have reached Thursday. See, we're getting there. And we were only an hour in today, too, right? Cool, right? Thursday, February 16th, day 358. And I called this after a Nintendo video game, Russian Attack. Ukrainian officials are warning civilians to prepare for a massive barrage of Russian missiles on the anniversary of President Putin's invasion next week. Russia fired 36 missiles towards critical infrastructures across Ukraine on Thursday. But officials say that they expect next week's volley to be much worse. Ukraine's air defenses have had some success in shooting down the incoming missiles, disabling 16 of the 36 that were launched on Thursday. But a larger barrage is likely to cause severe damage in most major cities. Yes, it will be tough, and we have to be ready for it. We must maintain maximum calm, Alexei Danilov, the head of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, told Ukrainian TV on Thursday, according to the Wall Street Journal. So I'm using multiple sources here. Russia began its current invasion of Ukraine back on February 24th of 2022. Ukrainian President Zelensky has warned for weeks that Russia plans to ramp up its aggression at the one-year mark, though in the past he has referenced a ground offensive. U.S. defense officials have agreed with Zelensky's assessment, saying that it's likely Putin will try an offensive in an effort to turn the tables after months of Ukraine regaining its own territory. The situation on the front line is complicated, he says in an interview earlier in February. Russia's preparing for the rematch. We can feel this. I believe that it has already started, but not fully. We will see that in the nearest weeks. Ukrainian forces are killing close to 1,000 Russian troops every day in this conflict, and they eliminated 5,000 troops in a single battle at the end of January, according to UK officials. More overlap there. Russian troops, including the elite 155th Naval Infantry, stormed the Ukrainian coal mining city of Vuhledar and near Donetsk in late January. Ukrainian forces repelled the offensive, however, and killed or injured or captured over 5,000 troops. Meanwhile, UK officials say the war is exacting a heavy toll on Russia, with 824 troops estimated dying each day, according to Ukrainian updates. The U.S. Department of State ordered all U.S. citizens to leave immediately on Monday, warning of false arrests. See, this is a lot of overlap. And it was that whole thing about don't travel to Russia. I just cut that one short because it's all repeat. Moving on. Big Baldy. Big Baldy. President Alexander Lukashenko of Belarus will launch military action against Ukraine if his country is attacked by even, quote, one soldier. I'm ready to fight together with the Russians for the territory of Belarus, in one case only, if so much as one soldier from Ukraine comes to our territory with a gun to kill my people, he says. Lukashenko made the comment Thursday in a press conference hosting foreign reporters at the Independence Palace in Minsk. This applies to our other neighbors, Lukashenko added. If they commit an aggression against Belarus, our response will be the most cruel. The most cruel, he repeated that. Lukashenko is the longest sitting European president, holding the office since it was established in 1994, following the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Good night, bearded guy. Thanks for hanging out with us. Domestic and foreign opponents of the regime have criticized his successful electoral victories as frauds. The government has arrested tens of thousands of political dissidents who question the legitimacy of the Belarusian government. Belarus remains a strong ally of Russia and supports the invasion of Ukraine. However, the Belarusian government has repeatedly expressed that there is no intention to join the conflict. Ukrainian forces are killing nearly 1,000 troops a day, and they eliminated 5,000 troops in a single battle in late January. More overlap. Anyway, that's all overlap story, so I'm not going to repeat the rest of those lines. Basically, Lukashenko is saying, if one soldier comes across, we're going to fight. So be
And if
prepared.
he sends one soldier into Ukraine, he's going to get his ass invaded. Period.
Well, imagine this. Russians doing Russian things, Belarusians doing Belarusian things, right? Who's to say that they don't capture a Ukrainian soldier, take his uniform, kick him out of the country, and then just put the uniform on someone else, one of their own guys, and stage a capture? Be like, look, we got this guy. This is our justification.
Because they would figure out very quickly, going through military records, that wasn't one of their soldiers.
Yeah, but by the time they do that, they're already fighting.
Belarus just waltz right into Ukraine.
Yeah.
You think Poland's gonna allow for it too?
Yes.
I don't think so.
No, I think if anybody else gets involved, Poland gets involved.
If Belarus gets involved, I can see Poland sending forces into Ukraine and Belarus because they have a border with both of them.
If Belarus sent troops into Ukraine, the perfect response is Poland pushes its forces into Belarus, forcing the Belarusians to come back to defend their country.
Mm-hmm.
That's the best method of action.
But I can
But
also see the Polish sending their forces into Ukraine because they really hate the Russians.
how awesome is
Yeah.
Belarus?
They got a really big axe to grind.
How
Yeah.
awesome is Belarus? Think about this.
Something about the Russians sitting there and not helping them during World War II, letting them get killed.
Poland has upped their military since back in the day. I would argue that the Polish military is big enough to fight the Belarusians and the Russians in Ukraine.
The Polish have the largest stockpiles of tanks of anyone in Europe.
They have every
including
model of every NATO tank that are in
not
everyone
only
else's
NATO,
inventory.
they got every model of every Russian tank too.
Yeah. It's like they have Kubinka Tank Museum as their inventory.
By the way, where do you think most of the AK factories were in Europe during the Cold War? Half of them
Czechoslovakia.
were in Poland.
Yeah, and the other. You're right. I'm being obtuse.
I know they made them elsewhere, but I've seen YouTube videos of just like empty AK factories where they have boxes that have AK-47s on them in Russian
Oh, no doubt.
in Poland.
But how awesome is Belarus? I'm joking here. I'm about to speak in hyperbole, okay? This is how awesome Belarus is, okay? They have had a president installed since 1994. Okay?
That's the same as Russia.
That is 29 years. Okay? That guy has been in power for 29 years. He has arrested tens of thousands of political dissidents who question his authority because he keeps cheating to stay in power, right? Wargaming Inc. is a multi-billion-dollar gaming titan of industry that was originally based in Belarus and was so disgusted by the politics of the country, they left and moved to Cyprus to get away from that bald dickhead and his policies. Think about that. He lost one of the biggest cash cows of his country because of the way that he runs the country. Because capitalism ruled the day. And now they have a 10 or 12 billion dollar massive corporate facility on the island of Cyprus. And people are still playing World of Everything. Pretty good.
Yeah.
That's how awesome Belarus is. They could lose that level of income and still keep that shithead in power. Wow. Okay, we're gonna go into something kind of cooler.
Okay,
We're gonna go into the mysterious world of Russian political suicides.
I thought we were going to go in the mysterious world of Chinese balloons and
We'll get there.
unidentified,
Now,
flying objects.
you're gonna want to see this one because this chick, Ninotchka, level of, I don't know, maybe she was hot 30 years ago.
I got it.
Another another high-ranking Russian official has turned up dead after being found under the window of her high-rise apartment building. Her. According to Russian reports Thursday. The body of 58-year-old Marina Yankina, head of the Financial Support Department of the Western Military District in St. Petersburg, was reportedly found Wednesday in what one report described as suicide after she, quote, fell from her home on the 16th floor. Other reports noted that suicide as the cause of death has not yet been confirmed. You don't say. Yankina's death is just the latest in a string of mysterious Russian deaths, many of which were caused by victims allegedly falling to their deaths. Pavel Antov, a sausage tycoon and local politician, was found dead in December after falling from a hotel window in India. His companion, Vladimir Budanov, was also reported to have died the same day after suffering a mysterious stroke. Antov had been critical of Russian President Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine. Ivan Pechorin, a managing director of an aviation company, was found dead in September after allegedly falling from a boat while being overly intoxicated. He wasn't shot in the neck with a tranquilizer or a weird drug. 2 weeks prior, Ravel Maganov, the chairman for Russian oil giant Lukoil, died after reportedly falling from a hospital window in Moscow.
You don't say.
In August, businessman and Putin critic Dan Rappaport reportedly jumped to his death from his apartment in Washington, D.C.
No.
This mysterious death of Marina Yankina is consistent with the Russian intelligence doctrine of wet affairs, or the spilling of blood. This came from Rebecca Koffler. You know her, she's got this long-ass title. Koffler explains that this doctrine dates back to the Soviet Union, when the secret police would target state critics or dissidents they deemed were, quote, enemies of the people, and would eliminate them through violent means. In today's Russia, Putin's critics and those unwilling to go along with his policies are routinely eliminated by assassination, she says. Shots in the back of the head, poisonings, forced suicides, and other intricate forms of violent death are some examples. Is she suggesting that people are pointing guns at these people saying, I can shoot you or you can jump? Really? Throwing someone out of a window or having the victim throw himself or herself out of a window is a pretty standard method, she says. Prior to her work with the Defense Department, Yankina reportedly worked at the Federal Tax Service and served as deputy chairman of the Property Relations Committee of St. Petersburg. It is unclear if Yankina was ever critical of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. I would hazard a guess to say I bet she was. Otherwise, why
likely.
would she jump out of... If you were a Russian anything right now,
You'd
I
be
think it
ashamed of
would
Russia.
behest you, or behoove you, to install burglar bars on all your windows. Real heavy ones. Real tight-knit ones so you can't accidentally fall between the bars. Just a thought. Especially if you live on any floor above 2. That was a lot of suicides. Like, I enjoyed reading that, just going through the list of all these idiots who fell out of windows. Fell out of windows, air quotes. Okay. My last story for you today involves Israel. And this guy. You may not know who he is, but I'll tell you who he is.
Did someone say Israel?
Israel. Foreign minister on Thursday made the first public visit to Ukraine by a senior Israeli official since Russia's invasion last year, pledging financial aid to the war-battered country, but giving no indication that Israel is ready to provide weapons to Ukraine. At a joint press conference with his Ukrainian counterpart, Foreign Minister Eli Cohen said Israel would offer a $200 million loan for construction of a healthcare facility. He also reiterated an Israeli offer to help Ukraine develop a smart early warning air raid system. But he gave no specifics on when that system might be delivered. He also made no mention of Russia and did not appear to respond to Ukrainian appeals for Israel to provide offensive weaponry. Israel, as stated in the past, stands firmly in solidarity with the people of Ukraine and remains committed to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, he says. The visit came just before the first anniversary of Russia's invasion, and Western nations seek to increase aid to the country. Since the outbreak of the war, Israel has walked a tightrope between assisting Ukraine and avoiding friction with Russia, with which it has a strategic regional interest. Unlike other Western countries, Israel has not imposed sanctions on Russia or Russian officials, or provided Ukraine with weapons. It has provided humanitarian support to Ukraine, including a field hospital, and pledged to provide the aerial warning system. Ukrainian leaders have talked about some intelligence cooperation with Israel, but Israeli officials have not publicly confirmed these ties or the extent of any such cooperation. They're really playing this carefully. Cohen met with Ukraine's foreign minister Dmytro Kuleba, who said on Twitter afterwards that he was thankful for all the support that Israel and Israelis have provided over the past year. During our detailed and frank talks, we focused on ways to enhance bilateral relations, increase assistance, and address shared security challenges, he says. Yevgen Kornichuk, Ukraine's ambassador to Israel, said that Israel again assured us that they will bring the early warning system, but they just didn't say when. Cohen later was meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky and leaders of the country's Jewish community as part of a brief trip. Cohen was reminded of the hardships endured by Ukrainians when air raid sirens sounded as he entered the country's foreign ministry. Cohen says earlier this year that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government will definitely do one thing. Publicly, we will talk less about Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but would keep providing Ukraine with humanitarian aid. Shortly after taking office, he spoke with the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lapdog. Yes, I pronounce his name like that. Israel maintains good working relations with both warring countries and has large populations of Russian and Ukrainian immigrants. Israel also relies on security coordination with Russia over neighboring Syria, where Israel has carried out hundreds of airstrikes against Iranian military positions in the past decade. Russian warplanes also operate in support of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, and Russia and Israel maintain communication to avoid conflict. As other Western nations step up assistance to Ukraine, pressure has built on Israel to share some of its sophisticated military means with Ukraine, including from the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said following a meeting with Netanyahu in Jerusalem last month that he emphasized the importance of providing support for all of Ukraine's needs, humanitarian, economic, and security. Yossi Shine, hard to say, a former member of the Knesset's Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, said Israel's ultra-nationalist government, which has butted heads with the Biden administration on the issue of West Bank settlements, may try to gain Washington's favor by providing defense capabilities to Ukraine, while, quote, not crossing certain lines that will endanger its lesser involvement because of the threats of Russia in neighboring Syria. Last year, Israel's former Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, attempted briefly to mediate between the sides, flying to Moscow shortly after Russia's invasion and meeting with President Vladimir Putin. Bennett said in an interview earlier this month that Putin assured him at the time that Russia would not kill Zelensky. Do you believe it?
No.
No. I think Russians doing Russian things. Okay, so that was the stories of the week, and we're only at an hour and 28 minutes, and I wanted to sort of, before we signed off for the week, I wanted to play a little game. And I sort of mentioned it in the intro. I know you guys were in the green room, so you might not have heard it, so I'll repeat it real quick. Give me a sec, I got a drink. Okay, so I wanted to start with this photo here. UFOs shot down over USA and Canada. Okay, this shows 5 instances in the month of February alone. First, second, anomaly, third, and then spy balloon. Okay, so it's 4 instances. They tracked the spy balloon, so it showed the day it got shot down right over the coast of your state.
Yep.
Okay. This is becoming a nuisance because we have thousands of rich and influential people taking private jets and going to Davos, Switzerland, and they're eating beluga caviar on crackers, and they're sipping on wine, right? they're eating good, they're living good, they're rubbing elbows with Leonardo DiCaprio, right? Who also came in on a private jet, and they were all making fun of John Kerry's big chin, shit like that. Al
Mm-hmm.
Gore's bald spot, things like that, right? They're all having fun. It's just a stupid orgy of affluent people all trying to place bets on who's going to be desperate enough to sleep with Greta Thunberg. Just saying.
Yeah.
Just saying. Because it's going to be David Hogg. We already know this. And what are they doing there? They're living it up, and then they're going to turn around and they're going to tell us that we have to drive electric cars, which we don't have a national power grid that can support it, and that they can turn off at any time to prevent you from moving about the country when they don't want you to. Think about that. They have also hyperinflated the price of every food item that they don't want you to eat. Eggs, beef, chicken, fish, pork, you name it. They don't want you eating these things because, first of all, they want to eat them. And second of all, they want you to eat bugs for protein because they don't make as much flatulence as a cow. I shared a story with Jaime, who is a rancher, about 150, quote, feral cows, which he identified as Angus bulls, in a state national park in New Mexico. Now, he was able to clarify to me, feral is not necessarily wild or rabid or whatever. It just means that they're unclaimed cows. They have no markings, no tags, no earmarks, no nothing. They're unclaimed. They're free roaming. Maybe someone let them go. Maybe somebody lost their herd before they could tag them. Nobody knows. Nobody's reporting missing cattle, so they're just out there. Problem is, state national park. They're grazing and they're destroying things by the acre. And what are they going to do? They're granting people the ability to snipe these things and eradicate them from helicopters, kind of like how we do hog hunting here in Texas. The idea of Flippy in a helicopter with a minigun over a herd of feral cattle is kind of scary. Because what's that going to do? First of all, if you kill the cows and then you don't clean it up, their rotting flesh is going to ruin the ground even worse, or poison the water, or whatever. It's 150 Angus cows. That's a lot of beef. If you take that beef off the market, what's that going to do to beef prices that are already insane? And now that they're even more insane, basically what these people are trying to do is they're trying to price us out of the market so they can have it and tell us to eat bugs. Shit like that, right? Anyway, they're doing all that, and now we've got UFOs in the air. We also get browbeat over emissions. And because of the way that the global jet stream works, countries like us have these very strict emissions standards. We're trying to set an example that we can be clean and environmentally aware. But then you get a nation like China, who's on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, and I mean, they've been making some efforts, but in all honesty, they don't give a fuck about emissions. Because what happens? The clouds, by the jet stream, are carried over the Pacific into the western seaboard of the United States. So some of the smog that they're blaming us for creating didn't come from us at all. It drifted over from the other side of the Pacific, because that's how the Gulf Stream and the jet streams work. That's how they knew how these balloons would travel. They didn't accidentally veered off. Any idiot looking at the jet stream can go, well, if you release the balloon here, it's going to take it in this arc, just like this, and it's going to go across all this part of the United States, where we just happen to have air bases, one in Missouri that houses our B-2 Spirits. They flew right past that damn thing and probably clicked away and took pictures. We didn't do shit with it until it actually left the coast of South Carolina. But hey, it was a peaceful weather balloon according to the Chinese. Good news is we just recovered the last part of that. We found all of it. That's the good news. Now we get to figure out what the hell it is. It will be embarrassing if we find out it really was nothing but a weather balloon. But it still shouldn't be over our airspace. Let's just get that out of the way.
Well, apparently a bunch of hobbyists are missing a balloon.
Yeah, I talked about that in the intro. There's a, I forgot what they called it, U.S. Hobbyist Balloon Association or something like that. They lost the one that got shot down over February 10th, over Alaska. They reported it missing the same day that we shot it down. Stands to reason. A $400,000 Sidewinder missile took out a $15 hobbyist balloon. Meh. It's good to be sure, right? Which leads me into my point. Okay? They're flying, was it F-22, Scott?
Yeah, they were.
Okay. They're flying F-22s. First of all, we don't have a whole lot of them just to go willy-nilly, right? I think you pointed that out.
Mm-hmm.
They're expensive to fly, they're expensive to maintain, and the weapons on them are expensive to use. And they're shooting down inexpensive balloons with very expensive weapons during one of the worst inflationary periods of the country while we're being led by an idiot that is making all our food prices and energy prices sky high and allowing fentanyl to cross the border and a conga line of criminal invaders on a daily basis walk right the fuck on in. On our dime. All that aside, let's talk about how do we stop this. What if this got escalated to the point where we're getting these flying objects to the tune of dozens a day? And maybe they're not always balloons. What if they're UAVs or gliders or something, right? NORAD is doing what it can to identify them, and then we send up the planes and, deal with it, right? They could bankrupt us just shooting down balloons if they sent enough of them, in theory. So, how do we stop this? Once upon a time, we had something called Strategic Air Command. This is what we talked about in the intro. This was sort of an aerial version of Homeland Security in the 1950s during the, what would you call it, the opening salvo of the Cold War. We built some of the greatest intercontinental nuclear capable bombers in history. The B-36 Peacemaker, the B-47 Strato Fortress, the B-58 Hustler, which, man, that thing was sexy looking, wasn't it? And, if you've ever seen the movie Strategic Air Command with Jimmy Stewart and, what was his name, Harry Morgan, it was basically like a 1.5 hour porn documentary on the B-36 Peacemaker because he got to fly it. He got to fly the 47 also. But it covered the fact that he would hop a flight out of, I think, Dallas or just outside of Dallas, fly all the way up to Alaska and all the way back in a single day. That was one surveillance flight mission which kept a nuclear-capable bomber in the air every day for months on end. That's what SAC did. And the Arctic Circle was at its most militarily busiest at this period of history. The Russians were flying over it. We were flying over it. I think the opening pieces of the Cold War, the pawns moving across the board very visually so we could see that, I'm posturing, you're posturing, right? That was these flights. What we also did was we invented and we released the USS Nautilus, which was the first nuclear submarine. And instead of constantly provoking our enemies with just the air campaign, we decided we were going to play the PR game at the same time. And we sent this nuclear weapon of war on PR runs. We were like, you know what? We're going to break a record. We're going to see if we can sail underneath the North Pole. We're going to see if we can sail the Northwest Passage under the ice and just see how long we can do this, right? They were breaking all these records for submarining with the first nuclear submarine in history. Like, that wasn't just showing off, that was beta testing. If we had to use it, now we know we can do this. So, like, this was all going on. So, my question is, if we have all these flights of things coming over, we should have a better dragnet of surveillance. But that's expensive, right? How can we do what we need to do quickly, expeditiously, obviously, cost effectively, and still maintain that SAC level of presence? Like, what if we brought back Strategic Air Command in that capacity? And so I came up with a couple of ideas because I know Scott watches it too. We probably all do. We watch the Grim Reapers do what if scenarios in like DCS world. And it's not the be all end all of simulators, but they credit where it's due. That group is a lot of active military men from different branches, from different countries all over the world. And they're sort of like the NATO of simulating air gamers, right? So it's like they take it very seriously. And yes, they're trying to entertain you, but they're also trying to make it as realistically as public source information will allow. I think that's a fair way of saying it. Because we all know the published numbers of what a military piece of hardware today is capable of. It ballparks it, but they never tell you the full capability. It can go a little bit faster, or it can go a little bit higher, or it can, it can do something a little bit better than what they're telling you, just so they always have that ace in their sleeve. I can understand that. I'm perfectly okay with that. But it ballparks it, which is good. They work within the confines of the ballpark figures, and probably a little of assumption, especially when it comes to performance of ballistic weapons, when there aren't no statistics or stealth capabilities, stuff like that, right? So, one of the things that these guys are really good at is the what if scenario of, and coincidentally, they did the what if, and then the world did it. So, like, they were like, what if we can put the AIM 120D guided munition missile from America on a Ukrainian MiG-29? Would it be effective? They tried it. They said, well, the pylon technically can handle this. We had to upgrade the avionics a little bit so it can communicate with the American weapon. Wouldn't you know it? They really did it in real life. So it's like, okay, some of these what if scenarios that these guys are putting up are feasible. And sometimes they actually happen. So my question is, if we had to create a screen for surveillance in our own country where we had to have aircraft that could be up in the air for a long time, like a loitering surveillance combat patrol, right? You go up, you fly in a waypoint arc. You have a flight of maybe 3 or 4 aircraft. You all fan out from base. Everyone goes off in a different direction. They do their visual sweep. They run their radar systems. They have like P3 Orions and AESA radars and just whatever other surveillance thing that they can work with. And that way they can get whatever their radar can do, and then they can get data link from far superior surveillance aircraft in the air that are always up there anyway, or satellites or whatever, beaming information into their display for whatever their system can't pick up naturally, right? To give them just eyes in the sky and they're a presence in the air, and maybe we can adapt a modern weapon on it So that way, if it spots something, or if they're data linked to something, they can fire that weapon, turn around, and run home because they're obviously inferior to whatever's coming, while they scramble the more expensive F-22 or F-35 or whatever we have to send up. But until you know what that threat is, don't send up your A team of stuff, because you don't have to. You can just send up a watchdog, like the security guard in the mall parking lot, right? You send up a bunch of those, and then they're the front line of, oh shit, there's something up there. But the thing is they've got a silver bullet in their gun that they get to fire before they turn around and run away and send off, call in the cavalry. This is my method of thinking for this exercise. And this is what I came up with. I based this off of the balloons, okay? First balloon was at an altitude of somewhere around 66,000 feet. Now, technically, the F-22 supposedly service ceiling is somewhere between 58 and 60,000. But that's public information. It could probably go a little bit higher and probably go a little bit faster than we see on the paper. But it doesn't have to, because it has like AIM-120D missiles, right? It can just fire that missile, and that missile will arc upward the extra couple thousand feet should it need to intercept the target. We actually saw the video of it firing a missile, and it did exactly that. It curved upward because the plane was below the altitude of the balloon, supposedly. Maybe not by much, but you could see the thing arc up. So you don't need a plane that can reach the same elevation because your missile can do it for you. So I came up with this. And it's not something we have here that we build here, but it's something we could build here in a hurry. So, what was it? The F-15EX. That was a plane that came up. That's the one that we build for export, right? Is that one? Is it the EX, or is it just F-16s we do for export?
I think it's just F-16s.
Okay, well, somebody brought up the
we do F-16s and F-18s.
Okay, so was it you brought up the F-15EX before this week?
Yeah.
Okay, those come at a unit cost of $80 million a piece.
Mm-hmm.
They're expensive aircraft. They're very good aircraft. It's just they're quite expensive, which means the maintenance and the weapons and everything that goes with them adds to the extra cost. That's a very expensive plane to fly. It probably takes a bit of time to build, and we'd have to build a bunch of them in a hurry if we had to build like this national air screen that I'm just dreaming up, right? So I thought, what can we build that can do that job, just not cost as much? And I came up with something that costs 1/8 the cost of the EX. Now granted, it can't fly as fast and it can't fly as high, but it can fly at 35,500 feet for 8.5 hours straight. That is a long loiter time for a surveillance craft, right? You get up there and you can hang out for 8 hours and then turn around and go home. If you really wanted to keep a constant surveillance, you take off, you fly for 8 hours, turn around, head home. By the time that one comes home, the second shift goes up. They fly their 8 hours. They turn around and come home. Third shift goes up, 8 hours, turn around and come home. That's a 24-hour day. That's 3 flights a day. Not the same pilot, not the same plane. Just so we don't wear each other out, right? Costs $10 million to build. Has the loiter time. Has most of the electronics equipment it needs, but it could probably take an upgrade or two for data link. And it has the weapon pylons, because they can take sidewinders, but maybe you can get AIM-120Ds on it. If you can do it to a MiG-29 from the, 1960s, I'm pretty sure you can adapt it to a plane that is still being created today.
MiG-29s were built in the 80s.
Are they? Okay, so, all right, fair enough. You could take a modern missile and put it on a MiG-29 built in the 80s. You could probably adapt it to a plane that's being built right now. That was my point.
Well, the thing about them putting the 120Ds on MiG-29s are, what made it easy and quick for them to do is it's already been done. Poland did it about 10 years ago.
Okay, but I mean, my
So
point is
all they
you
had to
should
do
be
is
able to
literally
adapt
roll over a
things.
few Polish techs
Yeah,
and a few boxes of extra goodies
and they'll figure it
for the
out.
plane, and it's like a week-long process.
Okay, so I mean, it stands to reason that if the pylon systems, if the plane could take a Sidewinder, that pylon system must be able to take a 120D. It's like it's similar thing, or maybe it takes a little
Not
bit of
necessarily.
modification.
Pylons have weight restrictions also.
Sure, but this is an adaptable thing, is what I'm saying. It's like you can't say, well, we got to rip the whole wing off. It's like, no, we got to just put this here instead. And then if you look at the size of the additional drop tanks you could put on one of these things, the weight of that's way more than the missile. So obviously this thing can handle the weight. Anyway, my point is, I'm going to introduce you to something called the A-29. It's an indigenous plane to Brazil. It's also known as the Super Tucano. And this is what it looks like. It's almost as if a Sky Raider and an F-14 had a dirty love child. Because the canopy looks like an F-14, but the body looks a bit like a Sky Raider, just a little stretched out, right? Anyway, if you look at this thing, it's got a 5-blade turboprop engine. Turboprops are like the diesel engine of aviation. Like they're smooth and they run damn near forever. They're like really efficient, right? This thing can fly for 8.5 hours at 35,500 feet. It can have the electronics complement it needs for data link or for whatever it needs for an oh shit moment, fire the missiles, turn around and head home, right? They
That looks
cost
like
$10 million a pop.
Two.
What's that?
That looks like something from World War II.
No, this is being made today. They make these now.
Yeah,
They
we were
use,
equipping the Afghan Air Force with them.
yeah.
A
Afghans
prop
got it.
airplane
Brazil's
in
got it. We have it. We have 12 of these. On record, we have 12. We probably got more, like Scott pointed out.
a prop airplane in this day and age.
It's not a prop. It's a turboprop engine.
Doesn't matter. It's got a prop.
Look at half, dude. Look at half the
Most
cargo
planes,
airplanes in our
military
inventory.
arsenals are jets these days.
Yes, but
Props are out of date by like
No.
40 years.
think of the job that it has to do. This is not for combat, okay? This is for setting up defensive screens. This is just having a presence in the air that carries like two 120Ds on it, okay? So you send up a flight of 4 of these in each state, and they fly 8 hours. And if anything is in the air, and their data link or their radar pick it up, they go, hey, there's something up there. I just fired off both missiles. I'm heading back to base. Send up the F-22s to this coordinate. That's all it's for, okay? This thing is not supposed to be dogfighting. These are perfect for that. And they only cost 10 mil a pop, minus the weapons, obviously, right? This was my first sort of nominee. Just because they're cheap, we already have them here. I'm sure we could probably say, hey, Brazil, we want to build these under contract. We need to make like 1,000 of these right now. Because if they can't build them for us, we have to build them ourselves. And obviously, we're the United States. We're like the titans of our own industry if we need to be. So we could build these things. Many nations already use them. It's a current aircraft. Yeah, it looks old world, right? But think about what it's capable of and the job it has to be asked to do. It's perfect for that job. Now, Scott pointed something out, and it's fair. It's not an interceptor, but I didn't pick this to be one. If we had to have an interceptor, because we don't have enough 22s, okay, what do we do that could fill that role so we don't have to use this? Granted, it's going to be more expensive, but it's going to be faster. My second choice comes out of history. And not really that far back in history, because we ran these things up until 1998, I think. Even though they started off in, I think, the 60s. It's able to climb from sea level to 58,000 feet in 6 minutes. That's an interceptor. That's pretty damn fast. Now, this will require a substantial upgrade, though. It's going to require modern avionics, modern radar, and the ability to carry modern missiles. I don't know if it's capable, but it's a neat idea because most of the people who flew these things spoke very highly of it. Like it started off, if I remember right, it started off with a different model before it as a training aircraft. And then I think the Navy liked it so much that they said, why don't we just put weapons on this? This is a great airplane. So they did. I give you the Convair F-106 Delta Dart. I made a joke about this the other day because somebody had pointed out to me correctly that the Montana Air National Guard only has KC-130s. They have nothing else. When I looked up this aircraft, they used to have these. It's like, why'd you give them up, you idiots? Well, because we didn't need it. We're Montana. What's going to come attack us? Well, I don't know. Chinese balloons? Anyway, so this is my second choice. I suspect it would be harder to retool to build these new because they're all either mothballed or dismantled or wore out, as Scott very effectively pointed out. Airframes wear out.
Most likely it's dismantled because look where that one's from.
Well, yeah, that particularly, yeah. But the last agency to service this aircraft and use it was NASA up until 1998. So somebody knew how to keep these going, right? Now, if they're all too clapped out, you're obviously going to have to start over. Would it be quicker to build new ones of these or refurbish the ones we got that are graded rebuildable? Now remember, possible wartime situation, you need to get these things done quickly, expeditiously, cost effectively, and in big numbers. I'm still kind of leaning towards the Tucano.
Actually, I'm gonna throw something out there for you.
Well, I want you to. This is like this was my two choices. What are yours?
While we have retired most of them, and I mean most of them, that doesn't mean we probably still don't have them sitting around waiting to either be dismantled or just lying around in a graveyard somewhere.
Go on.
We have tons of F-14s.
No.
Those
they were all destroyed.
No, not all of them.
Yes.
Our inventory of 14s are gone.
Display, unless it's a static display, they've all been destroyed.
Yeah. Now, if 16's different story. 14's mostly gone.
But I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, I mean...
Yeah, they did it so the Iranians couldn't try and source parts for theirs.
Yeah, and Tom Cruise had to steal one of theirs to get away.
Well, it wasn't really one of theirs.
Supposedly. Allegedly.
Allegedly.
But then again, it was allegedly Iran. They didn't really say it was Iran, but you know, wink nudge. Okay, Mike. So
unnamed Middle East country.
Okay, so
yeah.
if
the criteria. Okay.
I hate to tell you this, but that whole turboprop plane, no, that's like trying to send a Messerschmitt 163 against a MiG-23.
No. Look, okay. Maybe I didn't put the mission profile up clear enough, okay? Strategic Air Command originally, not the bombers, just like fighter aircraft, would go up, do a combat sweep, clear the skies, check out the skies, turn around and go home, okay? Then the next shift would go up there. It was constant, non-stop flights. Well, the non-stop ones were B-36s. There were B-36s with nuclear weapons on board in the air every hour on the hour the entire time SAC was operating up there. It was a constant trucking of these things, shifting back and forth, okay? What I'm suggesting is we do that with inexpensive aircraft that can loiter. This is the criteria, okay? It can go up in the air. It can run for at least 8 hours at a time. No in midair refueling. It has to be independent because if you start getting midair refueling and all this, it's becoming too costly and complicated, okay? You send up an aircraft, it flies around for 8 hours. If it doesn't find anything, it turns around, it goes home, everyone's happy, he goes back to bed, the next shift goes up, okay? But I'm saying that you have to install these groups in every state that needs them. So, like, think of all the states on the northern border to Canada, all the states on the southern border to Mexico, Florida and maybe your state on the eastern seaboard, maybe a couple in California. So you need at least like 10 to 15 in each of those states because they're all sending out flights every day. When you get down to like the middle of the country, like say Oklahoma, Kansas, South Dakota, Nebraska, they don't need 10 to 15 because they've got all the surrounding states already doing it for them. They only need like 3 to 5, right?
You realize there's a joint Air Force base here in South Carolina in Charleston, and then
The-
in Beaufort, South Carolina, there's also a Marine Air Base.
Fine. What is that going to do for identification of foreign objects flying into our airspace in Alaska? Nothing.
I don't know.
Nothing. Right, but see, that's my point. We don't know where these things are going to be coming from. If they're balloons, okay, we can say it drifts in from the west.
I say, but maybe we should put some anti-aircraft guns in place to
No,
attack.
because if you put guns down for anti-aircraft, they're too close already. You see my point? The whole point of this exercise is to have a presence in the air for long periods of time that can work with satellites, NORAD, and data link just to be a visual presence, right? Because I mean, look at this. We're intercepting Russian aircraft in Alaska twice this week, right? Because we scrambled fighters and we saw them and we escorted them out, right? They're poking at our defenses constantly, right? They're trying to see where the openings are. If we don't leave an opening, if they're like, Jesus Christ, look how many planes they've got in the air constantly, it's going to make it harder for them to even want to send things over because we're just going to keep blowing it out of the sky, right? If we have to keep blowing things out of the sky, we don't want to bankrupt ourselves doing that. We don't want to send up F-22s that are very expensive to fly and very expensive to maintain when you can send up a plane that costs $10 million. That is cheap to make, cheap to maintain, and can do the job where 99% of the time it's not going to see anything, right? It's the mall cop theory. That's all I'm saying. It doesn't have to be a tier 1 super fighter. Because I was thinking about this earlier too, and I thought, you know what blows my theory out of the sky? Those can't do shit against stealth aircraft. And a stealth aircraft will fire its missiles 100 miles before the Tucano can see anything, right? It would just blow up, and people are like, what the hell just happened? And they're going to be like, oh, NORAD reports there's a Su-57 working the area, and it fired a missile at 120 miles away, right? That's where the Tucano would fall flat on its face. However, the Tucano has NORAD. It's got P-3 Orions. It's got satellites. It's got everything else helping it. And these guys are just sort of watchdogs on the prowl. That kind of thing.
Okay, so the point is to have something to police the area, not
Yes.
necessarily be okay. Well, then
And then they can call in for the big guns if the need arises. Then you send the 22 up.
Here's a thought. These are I know for a fact these are in mothball, but I've heard rumors that some of them are still being used on some air bases.
Mm-hmm.
Why not the F-117s?
I asked that question
Since
to
they
Scott
don't have
earlier.
air capability.
They're bombers, aren't they?
Yes, they have air ground only. Technically, you could
That's
rig
the
up.
stealth attack craft.
Well, technically, you could rig up
Mm-hmm.
a couple sidewinders because they're
Sure.
infrared.
Yeah.
So you can launch them, and they'll acquire after launch.
Yeah.
Right.
But they don't have an onboard weapons radar. They have a navigational radar only.
They don't. Okay, so what you're saying is you could put weapons on them, but they have to be data link dependent weapons only because they can't
They would either
control
have
it.
to be data link dependent, or they would have to be infrared guided.
Right. And
They
plus,
have no way of guiding the weapons themselves.
they're perilously expensive to fly too.
Yes, and they are using some of them for, I'm assuming, anti-stealth training.
Yeah, they're being used as the target aircraft to be spotted,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mike, I thought that it was a great idea at first too, but when he brought up all these points, I'm like, okay, so much for that idea. But it was a fair one because I picked it once too.
I
I
just
like
do
my
not
idea
think it's
the
a good
best.
idea to use any sort of turbo.
So you wanted
any
to
sort of prop
use.
aircraft.
Okay, so go ahead, Scott. Tell people the one that you chose.
I came up. Well, I've got two different ones actually, because
Mhm.
you had two, I have two.
Yes.
My first choice would have been to rearm and remilitarize NASA's T-38 Talons. But then I thought about it, and if you want something that has long loiter time,
Hmm.
what do we already operate that can carry weapons and doesn't need a pilot
Drones.
Drone.
on board? Yeah. We have drones that can go up 50, 60,000 feet. We can arm those drones, and you can have a guy sitting behind the flight set up down in a trailer somewhere,
You know what?
anywhere in the world,
I
without with
And if the
data
drone
link.
runs out of battery, just rig a parachute.
I think
No,
you solved it.
I'm talking like the Global Hawk type drone, the
Yeah.
big freaking drones
I think you
that have
just
like
solved it.
24, 36-hour endurance.
Those are turboprop too.
No, jet.
No, Jet.
Which the one the one I'm thinking of is the scissor tail. It's got the turboprop in the back, the pusher engine.
Yeah,
It's not that one.
That's not that one. The Global Hawk is mainly a surveillance type aircraft. It's big.
Okay.
It's big. Probably the biggest drone we operate.
Oh, okay, okay. This is a bigger version of that one. This one has the jet on the top of it, on its spine.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. Whew. Yeah, what do these things cost?
They're expensive.
Okay,
But-
so like I was with you until I saw like what does it cost? $222 million a piece.
But they don't have to be.
What do you mean?
They don't have to have the same technology in them. You can take the base airframe
Yeah.
and make it cheaper, make it simpler.
Can these be weaponized?
Oh, hell yeah.
Okay. So, oh man. Okay. So it'll do 391 mile an hour. That's fine. It doesn't have to be fast. It just has to be there, right? That was the whole point.
I said we should be using something like that, to surveil the border.
Yeah, exactly. You remember when I was talking about the living wall, and you make like every, I don't know, 200 miles of the wall like a drone operating base, and then you just put them in a circle. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. So
Hell,
what is the
I know
service
the
ceiling of
military
this
was
thing?
experimenting with large surveillance blimp. That
Oh,
were
going back
drones.
to dirigibles.
Yeah, but drones.
That's, ooh.
Long loiter time.
Isn't that technically
solar
what the
panels
Chinese
on
just
them.
did?
No.
Mm.
I mean, it had solar panels. It had a balloon,
They
but
had no way of propelling
yeah,
moving
it
through
had
the
no
air where
propulsion.
it wants
Correct.
to be.
Got it. Got
Well,
it. Okay.
Speaking of the T-38s, the Air Force replaced those.
Yeah, with the F5.
But NASA
No,
still
the
operates them,
T7.
and they also use them for aggressor training.
Hmm.
But here's the thing: the United States Navy still uses them, and they're technically light fighters. And
Yes.
and so
They're
do,
cheap
so,
to maintain. They're cheap to operate.
so do our well, no, there's
And
different
several
aircraft
other
I'm thinking of.
overseas air forces.
And so do our Southeast Asia part allies use them. The
Yes.
F5,
Thailand, I believe, uses them.
the F5, which is based off the T-38.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at is the F5.
The F5 would be a much better idea. It's like just you don't have to have a whole bunch of them.
They don't have a lot of endurance. That's the problem.
Yeah, they
Well,
can't be
they
up in
don't
the air
need-
very long.
Well, they don't need to have a lot of endurance.
No, the whole point of setting up a surveillance screen
You're
is
setting up a picket line.
yeah, you're setting it up so you have eyes in the sky, and you don't have to send up 1,000 of them. You send up 50 of them on
You don't even need to
ships.
send that many up.
Well, no, like okay, so the way I had envisioned this is if you gave 15 of these Tucanos to Washington, 15 to Montana, 15 to North Dakota, okay? The first shift, each one of those states only send up 4, okay? And those 4 fan out, and they have a pre-designed route, like a seashell shape, right? Like a scallop. And then they go out and they loiter around for 8 hours with their radars on, and they're listening to uplink, and they're listening for data link. They got P3s and satellites and everything, and NORAD feeding them, right? And they're just sitting there with like two AIM 120Ds, one on each wing. They don't need a lot of them, right? Because they may only see one UFO, or worst case scenario, one flight of Russian jets or something, right? On data link. So they would go, oh shit, there's something. Boom. Fire off both missiles, turn around, dive down to the floor.
The missiles.
Right. Turn around, hit the deck, full speed, head back to base, call the F-22s. Enemy spotted, group flight, 6 planes. We fired all our missiles. We're heading back to base before they catch us. The problem with that is those jets probably fired their missiles long before the Tucanos got to fire, which is why they're so data link and NORAD and satellite dependent. But you only send up 4 because 99% of the time they're just going to go up there. It's going to be a snooze of a flight. They're not going to see nothing. They're going to turn around. They're going to go home. They're going to go back to bed. And the next 4 planes by 4 other pilots, they go up and do their 8 hours, right? So you have 3 shifts only doing 3 8-hour flights, which is a 24-hour day, and you've only used 12 out of your 15 allotted aircraft, which means you always have 3 aircraft in reserve, which means your maintenance guys don't have to bust their ass constantly to keep you in the air because you've always got 3 in reserve. And the chance that you're going to have 3 fail in a single day that didn't get shut out of the sky, pretty rare. I mean, turboprops are really reliable engines. That's why most like small companies use them.
You know
Like
what the
charter
problem
flights.
with that is, though?
Huh.
Where do you get the pilots?
Well, okay.
The U.S. Air Force is already strapped for pilots to the point where they're bringing back guys that have been out of the service for almost 10 years.
Well, so they have a recruitment campaign, obviously. Like we were talking about drones, right?
Nobody wants to go into the military under this particular precedent.
Correct. There has to be, obviously, a shift in policy. Correct. I 100% agree with you. But
Like,
see,
they're
that's
not even coming close to meeting their quotas.
but this is okay. So what I was thinking of is just the simple hardware aspect of it, though, right? And I think so far everyone's choices have been
Never
interesting.
mind the fact that you get stuck in a cockpit for 8 hours a day.
It's
Not
gonna
gonna
wear on
be
you a
great.
bit. But I mean,
Yeah.
how do you think those guys in like the B2s felt like? Where they took
The
off?
B2s have a little bed in the back that they can rest in.
Yes, but it was still a 36-hour day. Like,
Yeah,
okay,
one
this
guy.
guy's gonna go take a
But
nap,
here's the other thing. The B2 is so computerized and automated,
yeah.
the plane practically flies itself.
Well, Takano's got
I would bet
autopilot.
I would bet you the B2 for 95% of the time it's in the air is on autopilot.
Sure, but I mean, every aircraft has that nowadays. I mean, even a basic Sperry autopilot from the 1950s, it's just a wing leveler and an altimeter leveler, right? So it's just like, as long as you keep me in a straight line. And here's the best part. Modern autopilots are GPS guided. So like, you could literally just fly up in the air with a pilot in the cockpit, right? And he's got the autopilot set to GPS mode, and it just follows the flight path that was already programmed in GPS. So, like, fatigue, okay, maybe you're a little cramped in the cockpit or whatever, but there's probably enough room to stretch your legs. And I want to say Tucanos can take 2 people, so it's
Yeah.
not like you're alone.
It's usually one pilot and a weapons officer.
Okay, so you're not alone, and you're always in radar contact with at least your other 3 guys. And ATCs, and like I said, it's going to be a boring day, but it's like a necessary thing, to prevent red dawn, I guess. I don't know.
I think you're better off with drone tech. You can fly them out a couple 100
Yes.
miles over the ocean off the coast.
I like the
So it gives
idea,
you
but
longer
the cost
detection
is
range.
high. That's the
Well,
problem.
they don't have to be that particular aircraft.
Yeah.
I hate to say it, Sean, and you may not like to hear this, but no matter what avenue, the cost is going to be high no matter what.
Well, see,
Yeah.
that's the thing, right? If it's drones, if it's one we already have in inventory, okay, we have to look at unit cost. Now, the loiter time on that that drone that you pointed out, it's 36 hours. That's good. It's really good. But it's a $222 million piece of equipment, and that comes with its own maintenance costs, like we pointed out. What we didn't mention yet is the Super Tucanos that are being sent for Afghan use came at a unit cost. Now remember, the original unit cost is 10 million. The ones that went to Afghanistan have a unit cost of 178 million. But I think what you pointed out is perfect. That included all the maintenance parts, all the weapons for it, and all the ammunition that it's going to need too. In that regard, okay, I understand the cost. Still, though, it's 17 times the cost of the item itself. That's extreme. Like, it must have something else on it that makes it so valuable.
Well, it's probably got updated, targeting systems and shit like that.
That's what we're going to need. Sort of. I don't know.
I still say you could probably purpose build rapid prototype drones for
Okay.
way less money.
If you can come up with
Purposely
the
designed
cost,
drones.
yeah, if you can come up with it at a cost of like 10
Really,
million a pop.
realistically, it needs to carry a couple missiles.
Yeah, like 2. It doesn't need a lot.
Not a big deal to freaking hang a couple missiles under the wings.
Yep.
And big fuel tanks.
Mm-hmm.
And a semi-decent, avionics suite.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't have to be great.
Just
Because all it's
enough.
got to do is just go up there and do a racetrack pattern and just
Exactly. That is exactly why I picked what I picked, because it fits all those criteria. But the drone thing is a
So
good
the
idea too.
airframe doesn't have to be stealthy. The Global Hawks, I believe, are stealthy.
They're low vis.
It doesn't need to be stealthy, so that reduces cost quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Like significantly. Like you would believe.
Yeah, they're
So
low
it doesn't
vis.
have to be stealthy. And you make it out of composite materials. So,
Keep it light. So Burt
fiberglass.
Rutan gets a good job.
Keep it light. Yeah.
Yep.
Burt Rutan, bring him in. I bet you could rapidly design something within 6 months and have a prototype flying in 6 months.
Okay, what do you do in the meantime if this kicked off tomorrow?
So you'd have to use piloted aircraft until you can get yours up and running. But once you get the drones would be way more effective. Because literally, you could give them a refueling probe, and you could just send a tanker out to them, and they could just stay up for as long as you keep giving them gas.
Well, with a 36-hour loiter time, you wouldn't have to.
Well, I mean, you got to have hours of travel time on and off station back to the airbase.
Yeah.
Or to wherever they land.
Well, okay, wait. If we did every state's Air National Guard with this, they wouldn't have to go very far. Their combat circle would be, or their surveillance circle would be small, but they could stay up in that circle for 8 hours. You see what I'm saying?
But you wouldn't have to do all the states.
Well, yeah,
literally,
you could probably skip every other one or something. That's true.
No, with the sensors, airborne sensors that we have, between infrared, side mounted radar, lidar, whatever buku sensors you want to put on there, which I'm sure there's a few that I'm not even aware of, or nobody else. That's your largest cost, probably right there, is the sensors.
Yeah.
Data link it, so it's getting beamed back to a command center. And you can see literally if you're up at 50, 60,000 feet, they used to fly the SR-71, I'm sure you're aware of this, just along the border of China. And they could see thousands of miles into China.
Yeah, well, being as high
they did
as
the same
they
thing
were
with Russia. Yes, that's what I mean. A drone, you don't got to worry about keeping people alive at that fucking altitude.
Yeah, it's expendable.
It's essentially expendable.
It's expendable to the point where you still want to destroy the remnants.
If the remnants of it fall from 60 or 70,000 feet, there's probably not going to be very many.
It's going to get vaporized. Maybe, hopefully, allegedly.
So I think drones would probably be the best bet.
All right, I'm going to meet you in the middle here. I'm going to say that if we had a flight of 15 unidentified aircraft in a blob tomorrow, and we all of a sudden said, we got to put something up right now, we can develop the drone program to do that, because that would also double up on my living wall idea, which I think is awesome. But in the meantime, I'm still going to go with Super Tucano. I can't think of anything else that's inexpensive enough that can do the job as well as it could. And you know what? I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. I'm going to try to get a hold of Cap. And I'm going to ask him, can you graft an AIM-120D, one on each wing of a Super Tucano, take off from the U.S. mainland and intercept a flight of non-stealthy incoming Chinese aircraft from the West Coast? Just
Well, here,
as a
here's the thing.
stopgap.
At best, the Chinese would have to send one of their carriers, because that's the only thing that would have the range to launch aircraft within the continental range of the continental United States.
Yeah, or that I could just say, can you do a balloon buster
You're
mission
not
with that?
exactly riding around in a stealthy boat on an aircraft carrier.
No. All right, so I'm going to ask him to do a balloon busting mission. So it's like, okay,
Yeah,
take these
I'm
planes.
sure they're already working on it.
Yeah, it's like, can you take these planes up to 35,000 feet, have data link detect a balloon at 66,000 feet? Can you get AIM-120Ds to work on this plane, fire 2 missiles, turn around, and head back home, while you get Matrix to take off in an F-22 to confirm the kill? I think that's a pretty good exercise for them. They're always looking for stuff to do, right?
Yeah.
I think
Join
that'd
the
be,
Discord, and they've got a section where you can ask questions.
I need a
or
link to it
ideas.
so I can
Put
send that.
ideas.
I need a link to that so I
I
can
can
send it.
send you a link.
All right. Okay, so we are 2 hours and 20 minutes in. I think we've covered. I think that was a pretty good exercise, actually. I had fun with it. I think Mike had pretty good ideas. I think your drone idea is brilliant, actually. I don't even know why I didn't think of that. Like, that never even registered with me because I was so worried about, well, my poor Tucanos are going to get slaughtered by a stealth aircraft. Like, if an Su-57 could go up in the air and stay up in the air without falling apart, and
You mean all
somehow,
12 of them?
yeah. Well, I'm just saying, if they can even get one to stay up in the air long enough to fly over into Alaska, my poor Tucano is going to get obliterated because it's not even going to see that fucking thing. I was so hung up on that I didn't want to talk about the possibility of stealth. But then I thought, well, NORAD might pick it up. Maybe an Orion or whatever else is up in
They're
the air.
not
that
using
does that.
NORAD that much. I'm not even sure if it's still staffed.
Well,
If
I
it
mean,
is, it's like a skeleton crew.
supposedly they're the ones who caught the last 4 unidentified flying objects because they finally found out that, oh, wow, we actually have a job to do. It's like that's kind of came up, and it's like, okay.
Yeah, but NORAD basically is just a data center, really.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they're a confirmation data center too. They're like, hey, we picked up this thing. We're just
And
telling
the-
you that we saw it too, or whatever.
And to make a joke, they're also the only people that track Santa.
That's the thing, you see.
during
Now they
December.
actually have a real job.
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought that was fun. Like, if you guys like us playing this little what if game, leave a comment or something, because I don't mind playing it. I'll try to give my panelists more time to think about the answers, but I thought it was kind of cool. We should do it again sometime. Anyway, we're 2 hours and 22 minutes in, so I'm going to play this. And I'm going to thank you all for watching, because most of you probably will be catching this on the replay, because it's kind of late now. And this was the War Room, day 359. Next week, next Friday, will be the 1-year anniversary of the war nobody wanted. We will do a special on it. I'll confer with my panel here on how we're going to do that. But if you're new to my channel, welcome. If you're a regular here, welcome back. Either way, check out my other playlist, see if my other interest may be of interest to you. Rick, if you're listening to this, this is the kind of crap I'm talking about that gets you subscriptions. Put stuff out that people want to hear. Maybe they don't want to hear about the war. Anyway, this was the War Room. This was day 359. We'll be back next week. Slava Ukraini.
Heroim Slava.
And good night.
Shut up, me infringed!